All right, for questions 1 and 2, we already did a question like 1 in class today, but I'll go back over it and then I'll do question 2. For both of these questions, we're going to be using standard form because notice there aren't any parentheses and we have a number at the end that's completely by itself. So let's look at question 1 together. Okay, so on question 1, some things that we should notice right away. First of all, this 10 is by itself, which means my 10 is going to be my y-intercept, and because it's y, we have to put the 10 in the y spot. Also, domain, we always know is all real numbers. And range, even though I don't know the y value, I know that this is opening downward because it's got a -3 slope in the front. So I know it's going to be y less than or equal to something. So I'm just going to write y less than or equal to blank. If we can fill that in later, that's great. And if not, we at least know it's less than or equal to. Okay. My vertex then, this is something that we talked about today. Secretly, because there's no middle term, I can actually add parentheses here. So I'm going to rewrite this equation, and it's going to say y equals -3. And if I put parentheses, there's nothing in there, so that's just x plus 0 squared plus 10. And what this means is, from your IXLs, you may remember, that just means that we're only going to move up 10. We're not moving over any, so my vertex is going to be 0, 10, and that's where I'm going to start graphing. I know my slope is -3, so I'm going to go down 3 and to the right one and to the left one so that I get my nice pretty U. May not be pretty, but at least it's there. And then axis of symmetry, remember the x for axis of symmetry tells you to use the x value, so that's x equals 0. And now I actually have a y value for my range. Remember we said we were missing that before? Well, my y value comes from the y value in the vertex. So this is really y less than or equal to 10. And the only thing I can't fill in are the roots. I know that it's going to cross the x-axis, but I don't really know exactly where. So for that, I'm just going to leave it blank. Or you can write unknown, because we don't know. Next week we're going to learn how to find them, but right now we don't know actually how to find those roots. All right, question 2, very similar. Remember, we always know the domain is all real numbers. I know my range is y is greater than or equal to because I've got a positive number here in the front. Even though I can't treat a fraction as a slope, it's still positive. And then I know my y-intercept is -5 because that's the value that they give me that's by itself. So I can go ahead and start graphing at -5. If you remember from last week, when it's fractions, we have to plug in. So I'm going to pick 2. We use the denominator to pick, so that's times 2 minus 5. All right, the top multiplies. This is when x equals 2. So the top multiplies. That's going to give me 4 over 2 minus 5. And 4 divided by 2 is 2 minus 5, which is -3. So that gives me the ordered pair, 2 because that's what I plugged in, -3 because that's what I got. So 2, -3. I've got the same point on the other side, so I can graph. And when I do that, it's very easy to see that my vertex is actually already, it's that same point. I could have also rewritten it like I did question 1, x plus 0 squared minus 5. All right, so I can fill in my vertex is 0, -5. My axis of symmetry is going to be x equals 0 again. Y greater than or equal to -5. Remember, I'm pulling that from the y value of the vertex. And then again, roots, I don't know exactly where it crosses, so I'm just going to say unknown. So actually, this part at the bottom, the only thing this part at the bottom does is help us count since we don't really have a slope given to us. But if all I'm asking you is about vertex, is really just about these things off to the side, you don't even have to do the part with the fractions. Questions 3 and 4 are both in vertex form. Remember, in vertex form, the A tells us the slope and if it opens up or down. The inside tells us left or right, and we have to think opposite. And the outside tells us up or down. So if you remember, opposite here is going to give me +1, +3 as my vertex. Then I can fill in axis of symmetry from the x value. Domain is all real numbers. Range is y less than or equal to, because it's opening down. 3, because that's the y value from the vertex. So I'm going to take a second to graph all of that information so far. So I start at 1, 1, 3. Oh, that's not correct. 1, 3 over here. And then I know my slope is going to be negative 3 over 1, negative 3 over 1, and then I've got an axis running down the middle. So there's my parabola. Remember, anytime we want to find the y-intercept, we're going to do that by multiplying everything out. So we start with the parentheses. Oh, not squared. We write them twice because it's squared, and when we multiply that out, you're going to get x squared minus 1x plus 1. And then we want to bring down the negative 3 and the plus 3. When I distribute my negative 3, I'm going to get negative 3x squared plus 3x minus 3, and then plus 3 at the end. I know that's a lot of 3's. And then, like we talked about in class, we can combine like terms. So my final equation is y equals negative 3x squared plus 6x plus 0. So when we go to find our y-intercept, remember it's this value that's by itself out here. So I'm going to write for my y-intercept 0, 0. I'm plugging into the y spot. Notice that that is where it hits the y-axis. And then on this one, it turns out I actually do see my roots. Roots are on the x-axis, so they are these 2 points right here, which means my roots are going to be x values. So both of these are zeros, and they are at 0 and positive 2. All right, question 4. I think that you are probably okay with where I'm getting the vertex, the axis of symmetry from the x, domain, always all real numbers, and then the range greater than, because I'm opening up, and negative 4, because that's the y value. So again, to find the y-intercept, we always have to multiply everything out. So I'm going to do x minus 2 squared, which really means to do x minus 2 times x minus 2. So if I do that, most of you are going to use the box to do that. Now I'm going to bring the 2 down and negative 4 down. 2x squared minus 4x plus 8 minus 4. Combine my like terms. That gives me y equals 2x squared minus 8x plus 4. And all of that work, I know it seems like a lot, but all of that work is to give me my y-intercept, which means my y-intercept is going to be 0, 4. And now let's go ahead and graph what we have and see if we can see any roots. The only way you're going to find roots for these questions is if you can see them on the graph. So my vertex is going to be at 2, negative 4. I know that my y-intercept is going to be at 0, 4. And my slope is 2, remember from this front number. So I'm going to count up 2 for my vertex over 1, up 2 over 1. So my parabola is going to open up like that, which tells me there are roots, but I still don't know where they are. So I'm just going to say that right now these are unknown. All right, factored form. This is questions 5 and 6. Remember, a in the front is still the slope. And then our other 2 sets of parentheses here each give us roots. Remember, because they're inside parentheses, we have to think opposite. Okay, so I think that I deleted my own recording. So let me just explain where I got everything. Domain, all real numbers, always that. Range, I don't know what the y value is because I don't have a y value for my vertex. But I do know that it's going to be greater than because my slope is positive, so it's opening up. My roots, I get immediately from my problem, and I do opposite, and they're x values. So that's 2, 0, and negative 6, 0. So those 3 things I've found first, domain, range, and roots. And then I went back and found the y-intercept. Remember, that always comes from when you have to multiply everything back out. So I've got this is my answer when I did that multiplication. And you either do the box or you double distribute. I think you all know that. Because negative 12 is the value by itself. That's my y-intercept. Then I took all of that information, I went ahead and plotted my graph, and I just made it the best U that I could make it since I know it's going to open up. And in class today, we talked about how this negative 2, I'm getting that because that's the number that perfectly splits my U or my parabola right down the middle. So I've got negative 2 for the axis of symmetry, and also for the x value of the vertex. So, all right, question 6 is very similar. I'll go a little bit slower over it. So remember, start at domain, always all real numbers. I know range is y is less than or equal to something. I don't know what, but I know that it's less than because it's opening down. My y-intercept I'm going to get from multiplying. Notice that I went ahead and did that. And when you multiply, you have to ignore the -4 for a minute, which means the first multiplication problem you do is this x plus 2, x plus 1, which gives you x squared plus 1x plus 2x plus 2. And then we distribute the -4 and combine like terms. So make sure that you haven't skipped those steps. We do all that work to get our y-intercept of -4, or -8, I'm sorry, so that's 0, -8. So I'm going to go ahead and plot my points, and then hopefully in doing that, I'll be able to find my axis of symmetry and my vertex. So I've got a root at -2, another root at -1. Oh goodness, those are right next to each other. And then a y-intercept of -8. Okay, so these have to open down, which means it's going to be some U-looking thing, kind of like that. And axis of symmetry has to cut right down the middle. So right in between -2 and -1 is going to be -1.5. So my axis of symmetry that I'm going to write here is x equals -1.5. And then my vertex is going to be -1.5 something. I don't know what it is, but I at least know that it's the -1.5 for the x part. All right, when we go to write equations, remember there are 3 different formats. I've included them all at the top just for reference. And we just have to use whichever one makes the most sense with the information we've been given. So reflection across the x-axis, that means I need a slope of -1. And then we're going to shift left 2. Well, the only one of these formats that tells me about shifting left or right is my vertex form right here. So I'm going to write my equation as y equals -1 x. Remember, on the inside is left and right, and you have to think opposite. So that's going to be x plus 2 squared. And it doesn't tell me I need to go up or down at all, so I'm just going to say plus 0 at the end. All right, there's question 7. Question 8, they give me a slope of 5 and a y-intercept. Well, slope and y-intercept, the only one I have y-intercept in is this last one. Or sorry, the first one in standard form. Remember, y-intercept is that number by itself. So my equation is going to be y equals 5x squared. You can put anything you want to in the middle. So this could be plus anything x. You could put 5, 17, 0, -3, it doesn't matter. And the last number, though, is going to have to be -8. So the only things that have to 100% be in your equation are the 5x squared and the -8. And then any number you want to in the middle will be counted correct. All right, question 9 opens down. Okay, that's the same as reflect, so that means I need a slope, some type of negative slope. And then this one gives me roots. Well, the format that tells me about roots is my factored form when we have 2 different parentheses. So if I want it to open down, I'm going to say y equals, you can put -1 here. Really, if you put any negative number in the front right here, any negative number, well, that's not what I meant to say, any negative number, then it will work as long as it's negative. And then my roots, remember, roots, anything on the inside of parentheses is opposite. So if I need -5, I'm going to write x plus 5. And if I need +3, then my other parenthesis needs to be x minus 3. Okay, last one, 10. Question 10 is asking me to write something with a slope of 2. Remember, slope is really in all of these. So that part doesn't actually tell me anything because all of them, notice all of these formats have an A in the front that means slope. And this time they give me a vertex. Well, vertex is going to mean vertex form. And so if I write slope of 2, that's going to be y equals 2. The first one is your x value, and you have to think opposite. So since the x value is +2 here, I'm going to write negative 2 squared. I'm getting that from this x value in the ordered pair. And then the outside is the same. So on the outside, I will just write plus 9. Okay, this last set, this is just practice finding the pattern, which is something we're going to use next week. Remember that question 13, we said there's an error on, there is no right answer, so we can just mark that whole question out. I'm going to work one of these with you, and then I'll just give you the answers for the others so that you can keep working and make sure you know how to find those. So we said in class, we said the easiest thing to do is start with the product. And if you don't know the two numbers, just to start dividing in your calculator. So if I do 42 divided by, well, 1's the easiest number, I get 1 times 42. Well, 1 and 42 do not make 13, so that one doesn't work. And then I could do 2, and in my calculator it's 2 times 21. Well, 2 plus 21 equals 23, so that one doesn't work. I could do 3, and it's going to be 3 times, let's see, I think 14. Well, if I add those, that gives me 17, so that doesn't work, but I am getting closer. If I do, let's see, 4 is not going to work. My calculator will give me a decimal, the same for 5. When I do 6 in my calculator, I get 7, right? 42 divided by 6 is 7, so 6 plus 7 is going to give me 13, which is what I'm looking for. So my numbers are 6 and 7. So if you don't recognize the pattern right off the top, you just need to kind of start working through your numbers until you find the two that work. All right, here are your other answers for these. Make sure that you notice 15 is generally one of the harder ones because people forget about 24 and 1. Like most of the time people just start at 2, and so they forget that you can have like the number itself and 1. So just keep that in mind. Hopefully you got those right. That's just something you have to practice. So you may want to look back at your puzzle pages that we worked in class this week.